Now, the fallout of the Russia-Ukraine war can be felt across the globe. It has already led to severe energy crisis in Europe. Countries are now reporting record inflation. In the midst of this, food security has taken center stage. UN meet on global food security call to action was held at New York, which was chaired by US Secretary of State Antony Blinken. And UN Chief Antonio Guterres at the meet warned that the growing global food security crisis could extend for decades if allowed to go unchecked. The Secretary General said he was in intense contact with Russia, Ukraine, Turkey, Western nations to restore supply of Ukrainian wheat. Guterres also appealed to the Kremlin to allow export of Ukrainian grain and Russian fertilizers.
There is no effective solution to the food crisis without reintegrating Ukraine's food production as well as the food and fertilizer produced by Russia and Belarus into world markets despite the war. Russia must permit the safe and secure export of grain stored in Ukrainian ports. Alternative transportation routes can be explored, even if we know that by itself they will not be enough to solve the problem. And Russian food and fertilizers must have unrestricted access to world markets without indirect impediments.
Now, Russia and Ukraine alone produce 30% of the global wheat supply, but the Russia-Ukraine conflict has disrupted supplies of fertilizer, wheat and other commodities from both countries, pushing up prices of food and fuel, especially in developing nations. Before the invasion in February, Ukraine was seen as the world's breadbasket, exporting 4.5 million tons of agricultural produce per month through its ports. 12% of plant's wheat, 15% of its corn and half of its sunflower oil. But with the ports of Odessa, Chornomorsk and others cut off from the world by Russian warships, the supply can only travel on congested land routes that are far less efficient. Now, Guterres also appealed to the Kremlin to allow export of Ukrainian grain and Russian fertilizers. The chair of the UN meeting, Antony Blinken, also reiterated the call for restoring balance to food supply chains. The United States has now pledged an additional $215 million to find emergency food assistance to meet global humanitarian needs, while the World Bank announced an additional $12 billion in funding to mitigate the devastating effects of the food crisis.
Some have tried to blame the sanctions imposed on the Russian Federation by the United States and many other countries for worsening this crisis. This is false. When we impose sanctions on Russia in order to end the war as quickly as possible, we deliberately and carefully created exceptions for agricultural goods and fertilizer. We're working every day to get countries any information or assistance they need to ensure that sanctions are not preventing food or fertilizer from leaving Russia or anywhere else. Every driver of the crisis that we'll discuss today has been made worse by President Putin's war of choice.
Meanwhile, India highlighted the need for developing creative solutions for the crisis. Indian minister flagged the recent spike in food prices across the globe, highlighting the issues of hoarding and speculation. India called for equality during distribution of humanitarian assistance, also cautioned that open markets must not lead to inequity or help promote discrimination. Remember, India last week banned wheat export in the face of falling production due to heat wave.
It's necessary for all of us to adequately appreciate the importance of equity, affordability and accessibility when it comes to food grains. We have already seen to our great cost how these principles were disregarded in the case of COVID-19 vaccines. Open markets must not become an argument to perpetuate inequity and promote discrimination.
Now, food security, it's an issue. It's worsening before the beginning of the Ukrainian crisis. According to UN, severe food security in 2021 affected 246 million people versus 135 million pre-pandemic. Food insecurity is also soaring due to warming temperatures, which is pushed higher by climate change. WION is now available in your country. Download the app now. Get all the news on the move.